The day Grace opened her own front door and found strangers eating breakfast in her living room, she realized betrayal doesn't always come from enemies, it comes from the people who once called you Mom. What happened next turned her quiet life into a courtroom storm no one saw coming. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. We love hearing how far our stories of courage and justice are reaching. When I heard her voice echo from the porch, it didn't sound real. You again? Haven't you realized this house isn't yours anymore? The words sliced through the sea breeze like broken glass. For a moment I stood motionless, my suitcase heavy in my hand, the keys trembling between my fingers. The morning sun reflected on the windows of the small beach house I had built brick by brick after my husband's death. I had come early that Friday, hoping for the usual quiet, the scent of salt in the air, the sound of the waves against the rocks, the peace I had spent a lifetime earning. But what greeted me was chaos, and a kind of cruelty I had never imagined could come from my own family. 3 unfamiliar cars were parked in the driveway, blocking the gate I had painted sky blue just last summer. Loud pop music blasted from the living room. I could smell burnt food from the kitchen. When I stepped inside, I froze. The house I had cherished for almost 20 years looked like it had been ransacked. Wet towels were piled on the sofa, beer cans rolled on the floor, and muddy footprints marked the tiles I used to polish every weekend. A group of strangers, Karen's relatives, apparently were lounging on my furniture as if they had paid for it. Children ran across my deck, chasing a ball that shattered one of the ceramic pots where I had grown red geraniums for over a decade. And then I saw her, Karen, my daughter-in-law, standing on the porch with a smirk that told me I was no longer welcome. She was wearing my apron, the one I had embroidered with small blue flowers, the one I used every summer when my son and his family visited. Her tone was sharp, cold, and practiced. Michael said we could use the place for as long as we want. You don't even come here that often. Why let it go to waste? I tried to stay calm. Karen, I said softly, this is my house. I built it with my own hands. Every inch of it. She laughed, a short, cruel laugh that felt like it came from someone who enjoyed seeing another person small and powerless. Oh, please, Grace, she said, tilting her head as though she were speaking to a child. Michael is your son. What's yours is his, and what's his is mine. Isn't that what family means? The room seemed to shrink around me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My own son's wife was standing in my doorway, claiming ownership of the only thing in this world that truly belonged to me. I looked around at the mess, at the strangers, at the photographs of my late husband still hanging on the wall behind them, and something inside me cracked. Where's Michael? I asked. My voice was thin, almost fragile. He's working, she said with a shrug. Someone in this family has to. Her mother appeared from the kitchen, holding one of my porcelain cups, sipping coffee as if she lived there. So, you're Grace, she said with a faint smile that never reached her eyes. I expected someone more, put together. The laughter that followed from the others stung worse than any slap could have. I was 70 years old, dressed simply, carrying a small bag and a lifetime of memories, and to them, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. The humiliation was unbearable. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, judging, waiting for me to explode, but I didn't. I stood as straight as I could, took one slow breath, and said quietly, I understand. I didn't raise my voice, didn't curse, didn't fight back because I knew something they didn't. The calm before the storm isn't weakness, it's warning. When I turned to leave, one of the teenagers called out, Why don't you just go stay at a hotel, Grandma? You're making everyone uncomfortable. The laughter that followed chased me all the way to my car. But I didn't cry, not yet. As I gripped the steering wheel, I looked at the reflection of my house in the rearview mirror. The white shutters I had painted myself, the deck my husband once dreamed of fishing from, the walls that had held every memory of our little family, all of it now occupied by people who saw me as disposable. That image burned into me. The rage that rose in my chest wasn't wild or violent. It was cold, steady, and precise, the kind of anger that doesn't shout, the kind that plans. I drove to a nearby cafe, ordered black coffee I barely tasted, and stared out at the ocean. My hands still shook, but my thoughts began to sharpen. I remembered every year I had worked extra hours as a tailor, sewing dresses for strangers to save enough for that house. I remembered the days I came alone after my husband died, carrying paint buckets and tools, learning how to fix what broke because no one else would. And I remembered the night my son promised me, "Mom, no matter what, this will always be your place, your home." How could that boy, the same boy who had once helped me plant the first tree by the porch, allow his wife to humiliate me this way? When had love turned into entitlement? When had gratitude become greed? The questions circled in my mind like storm clouds, each darker than the last. But amid the ache, something else began to rise. A decision. I wasn't going to let them take away what I had built. Not my home, not my dignity, not the story of my life. At that moment, I didn't know how deep their betrayal truly went. I didn't know that a fake doctor's note and a property transfer were already waiting with my name forged at the bottom. I didn't know that my own son had been convinced that protecting the family's future meant declaring his mother unfit to manage her own home. All I knew was that I had been cast out and that I wasn't done. Not yet. The ocean outside shimmered under the morning light, calm on the surface but restless underneath, much like me. I gathered my things, finished the last sip of coffee, and whispered, "You chose the wrong old woman to underestimate." From that moment, everything changed. If you're watching this story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more real stories about strength, justice, and second chances. Every click, every comment keeps this community alive and growing, and it means the world to us. Now, before we continue, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Imagine you returned home one day to find your family living there without your permission. What would you do first? A. Walk away quietly and try to reason with them later. B. Take immediate action to reclaim what's yours. Tell us your answer in the comments. Just type A or B below. I'm curious to see how you would handle it. I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of the ocean that usually soothed me now felt like a cruel reminder that peace had been stolen. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smirk, her mother's mocking glance, and the strangers who treated my home like a rental property. The hotel room was small and smelled faintly of bleach, its cheap lamp flickering in the corner. I sat at the edge of the bed, my hands folded on my lap, thinking about everything I had seen that day, the wet towels, the beer cans, the laughter. I had been dismissed from my own life as if I were a piece of old furniture that no longer served a purpose. By morning, I had convinced myself that it had to be some misunderstanding. Perhaps they had spoken without thinking. Perhaps Michael didn't know how his wife had treated me. At 8 o'clock, I returned to the beach house, the one I still called mine, though my voice trembled each time I said the word. The sight that greeted me was worse than before. The front door was locked. My key didn't fit. I had to ring the doorbell to my own home. When the door finally opened, Karen's sister, a woman named Veronica I barely knew, stood there in her pajamas, holding a half-eaten piece of toast. She looked annoyed. "What do you want?" she asked flatly. I forced a polite smile. "Good morning. I just came to pick up a few of my personal things, and I'd like to talk to Karen, please." Veronica shrugged. "She's sleeping, and your things? They're in bags in the garage." We didn't want them in the way. I don't know if there are words strong enough to describe what that sentence did to me. My clothes, my life folded and stored in black plastic garbage bags, like something disposable. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I simply stared at her, my throat dry. "In the garage?" I repeated, more to myself than to her. "Yes," she said impatiently. "The house is full. We've got family staying in every room." She stepped aside, and I walked into what used to be my home. The air smelled different, heavy with grease, cheap perfume, and cigarette smoke. I barely recognized the place. My living room, once tidy and quiet, was a battlefield of clothes, food wrappers, and inflatable mattresses. The coffee table I had sanded myself was scratched and sticky. The curtains I had sewn by hand were tied in knots, stained with something I didn't want to identify. It was as if years of love had been wiped away in a single weekend. In the kitchen, I stopped breathing. My beautiful stove was covered in burnt grease. The sink overflowed with dirty dishes, and flies buzzed lazily around the pile. My favorite pots, heavy stainless steel ones I had saved months to buy, were blackened at the bottom, ruined beyond repair. "Where are my china plates?" I asked quietly, already afraid of the answer. Veronica didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, those? Some broke. The kids were playing. Anyway, they were old. Karen said you probably didn't care." They were the only valuable set I owned. I had spent months buying each piece one by one, saving a little from every paycheck. Those plates had been a symbol of pride, a quiet reminder of how far I'd come after losing my husband. Hearing they were broken felt like hearing a friend had died. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, hoping for one small corner of comfort. Instead, I found Karen's mother inside, calmly folding clothes on my bed. My bed. "Good morning," I said, though my voice was shaking. "What are you doing in here?" She smiled as if I were the guest. "Oh, don't worry, Grace. Karen told me you wouldn't mind. I'm organizing your clothes in bags so they won't wrinkle. You can thank me later." My closet was open, my shoes scattered. My blouses, dresses, and scarves, the little pieces of myself I had collected over decades, were stuffed into those same plastic bags. 2 children I didn't know were sleeping on my bed, drooling onto my pillows. I wanted to scream, to throw them all out, but my voice refused to cooperate. It was as if humiliation had stolen even that. I went back downstairs, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Karen was sitting on the terrace, drinking coffee from my favorite mug, the one with the small chip on the rim I'd refused to throw away because my husband had given it to me. She was wearing my robe, the soft one I used every morning when I watched the sunrise. She was laughing on the phone, her feet on my table. "Yes, Mom," she said, "the house is perfect. I told you I'd handle everything. The old lady knows her place now." When she saw me, she hung up and rolled her eyes. "You again? Didn't we make it clear that there's no room for you?" I looked at her, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "This house is legally mine, Karen. I have the deed, the bills, the tax records, everything." She sighed, bored. "Michael's your son, right? So what's yours is his, and what's his is mine. That's how families work. Besides, look how happy everyone is. The house is full of laughter. Isn't that better than being empty?" "Happy?" I said quietly. "You've destroyed my kitchen, broken my dishes, and thrown my clothes into bags. You call that happiness?" Karen smirked, tilting her head. "You're being dramatic. You had a lot of old things that were no longer useful. We did a little cleaning. You should thank us." In that moment, I realized she wasn't just thoughtless, she was cruel. She believed her own lies. She genuinely thought she had the right to take, to ruin, to dominate. I stared at her for a long time, searching for any trace of the girl I'd once welcomed into my family. There was nothing left, only arrogance and greed. "Where's Michael?" I asked. "I told you he's at work, and don't bother him with this nonsense. He agrees with me. He said it's time the house was used for something productive instead of sitting empty, waiting for your occasional visits." That lie landed like a stone in my stomach. My son, my only child, had supposedly agreed to this invasion. He hadn't called. He hadn't defended me. He hadn't even warned me. I took one long breath and said, "You have until tomorrow to leave this house, all of you." Karen laughed, loud and sharp. "Or what? You'll call the police? You'll sue your own son? Don't be ridiculous, Grace. You can't win. We're family." I stared at her, memorizing the shape of her smirk, the arrogance in her eyes. "You're right," I said calmly. "We are family, and that's exactly why this will hurt more than you can imagine." When I stepped outside, the sea breeze hit my face, cooling the fire inside me. I looked at the horizon and whispered to myself, "Wolves don't attack their own pack," but she just attacked the oldest and wisest one. Then I smiled a small, quiet smile. She thought she'd won. She had no idea what I was about to do next. When I drove away from the house that morning, the sky was heavy with gray clouds that matched the weight in my chest. The road curved along the coast, every turn lined with the same seagrass and wind-bent trees that had once made me feel at peace. Now they looked like sentinels watching me retreat. I couldn't bear to look at the house in the rearview mirror for long. The pain was too sharp, too immediate. I had built that place with my own hands, and yet I was leaving it like a trespasser, exiled by the very people I had once called family. As I drove, my mind drifted back 20 years, to a summer afternoon when that stretch of land had been nothing more than a patch of sand and wild weeds. I had stood there wearing old sneakers, clutching a folder of savings statements and sketches I had drawn myself. My husband had been gone for almost a year then. Grief had not yet softened into memory. It still lived in every breath I took. I remember the real estate agent looking at me doubtfully when I said I wanted to buy the land. "It's a big project for one woman," he warned. "Especially a widow." I smiled the way women smile when they've been underestimated their entire lives. "That's exactly why I'll do it," I told him. Back then, I was 52, still working as a tailor in a downtown shop, taking every extra job I could find. I sewed school uniforms at dawn and altered wedding dresses long after midnight. Each paycheck was split carefully: rent, groceries, and a small envelope marked House Fund. When the envelope finally grew thick enough to open a bank account, I walked to the branch trembling, afraid they would laugh at me for depositing such small sums. But month after month, the numbers grew. After 2 years, I had saved $46,000, every penny clean, every dollar honest. The day the architect came to meet me, he must have thought I was joking. He spread the blueprints on the hood of his car and frowned. "Mrs. Simmons," he said, "you'll need at least $50,000 to complete this, and that's if everything goes perfectly." I showed him my bank book. The ink faded from constant handling. 46, I said, "and I'll do the rest myself." He raised an eyebrow, half amused, half impressed. "You plan to build it with your own hands?" "With these," I said, holding up fingers still rough from years of stitching. "They've built harder things than walls." When the first workers arrived, my son Michael was there with me. He was 27, then young, idealistic, still the boy who brought me coffee when I stayed up sewing late into the night. He watched the men dig the foundation and asked, "Mom, are you sure about this? It's going to be a lot of work." I remember touching his shoulder and saying, "Work never scared me, son. Depending on others does." His smile that day still lingers in my memory, wide and full of pride. "You're the strongest woman I know," he said. "One day I'll tell my kids how my mother built a house by the sea." Those words carried me through every setback that followed. The months of rain when construction halted, the nights when I came home aching, my hands swollen from carrying bricks and sand. I learned to mix cement, to paint walls, to bargain with suppliers who tried to overcharge me. I made sandwiches for the crew and swept the floors myself after they left. Every nail hammered into that frame was a promise to myself, to my late husband, to the life I refused to give up. When the walls finally stood tall and white against the ocean wind, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just a house, it was a declaration. The sound of waves crashing beyond the porch felt like applause from the universe itself. I bought secondhand furniture, polished each piece until it gleamed, and filled the rooms with the scent of lavender soap. I hung our wedding picture by the window, where the morning light would fall on it. For the first time since his death, I slept through the night without waking to cry. Every corner of that home had a story. The dining table I purchased after sewing curtains for 3 neighbors, the floral couch I reupholstered myself with leftover fabric from a client's project. Even the set of kitchen pots, stainless steel, heavy and far too expensive, had been bought after I skipped buying new clothes for an entire year. But the reward was worth it. Every time I cooked in that kitchen, I felt my husband's presence beside me, like he was tasting the food and saying, "You did it, Grace." When Michael graduated college, we celebrated on that same deck. He stood there, looking out at the ocean, and said, "This place will always be our family's safe haven." I believed him. For years afterward, he brought Karen there during holidays. She was polite then, even kind. She would compliment the house, saying, "You must be so proud, Mom. I never imagined those same lips would one day call me an intruder." I remember the first summer after she married Michael. She helped me cook clams on the grill and thanked me for the handmade tablecloth I gifted her. But as years passed, her tone changed. She started making small comments, little jabs that seemed harmless at first. "You still drive that old car? "You should let Michael handle things now." Or, "It's such a waste for the beach house to sit empty while you live in the city." At the time, I brushed it off as carelessness. I never imagined those words were the seeds of something darker, something deliberate. Now, as I drove away from that same house, the memories collided with the present, like waves breaking over one another. I saw myself standing in the garden, younger, sunburned, full of hope. Then I saw Karen, laughing in my apron, drinking coffee from my cup. The contrast was unbearable. How could a lifetime of love and labor be reduced to a weekend of disrespect? But amid the sorrow, a quiet strength began to rise. I had built that home once from the ground up. I could rebuild my peace from the ashes of this betrayal. My husband had once told me that real strength isn't about lifting weight, it's about enduring storms and still standing when the sky clears. That night, as I parked outside the small motel, I looked out at the sea and whispered to him, "You'd be proud of me, John. I'm not going to let them win." The house wasn't just walls and paint, it was proof that I had survived widowhood, poverty, and loneliness. It was a symbol of every scar I carried and every victory I earned. And as the first drops of rain began to fall on the windshield, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not lose what I had built, not to greed, not to arrogance, and certainly not to anyone who mistook my age for weakness. I switched off the car, sat in silence, and let the memories settle. The ocean roared outside, fierce and endless. Somewhere deep within that sound, I found my resolve. Tomorrow, I decided, the woman they had called old would start a war they didn't even know how to fight. When I returned to that house under the pretense of retrieving my medication, I wasn't the same woman who had left it the day before. My hands still shook, but not from fear. They trembled from something colder, steadier, and anger honed into purpose. The laughter of Karen's relatives echoed across the porch as I stepped through the front door. I told her I'd only be a few minutes. She barely looked up, too busy seasoning meat for a barbecue that was about to take place on my deck, on my property, using my food. "Just don't touch anything that's not yours," she said, smirking as if the words were an inside joke. I nodded once and walked upstairs. Each step up the staircase felt heavier than the last. I tried to steady my breathing, but the deeper I went into that house, the more foreign it felt. The walls still wore the same pale cream paint, the same frames hung crookedly where they always had, but the air was different, corrupted. When I reached my bedroom, I stopped. The sight before me made my chest tighten. The drawers of my vanity were open, my jewelry boxes scattered, the scent of cheap perfume thick in the air. The mirror had a long scratch across it, like someone had dragged a key across the glass. My favorite nightgown was draped over a chair I didn't recognize. And then I saw the small children's shoes on the floor, right next to my bed. Two kids I had never seen before were sleeping under my blanket, their toys spread over the rug. A woman's purse, Karen's mother's, I later realized was sitting on my dresser beside a bottle of hair dye that had stained the top of the wood. My bathtub, once pristine white, was streaked with black residue. The towels I had embroidered myself were piled in a corner, damp and gray. I didn't cry, not even when I noticed that my photo albums were missing from the bottom shelf. Instead, I moved to the back wall of the closet, toward a small hidden door. It wasn't exactly a secret room, but it was private, a narrow space behind the closet where I had kept things too important to leave in plain sight. Old letters, jewelry, property records, insurance certificates, and my late husband's documents. I had always been careful with that compartment. Even my son, Michael, didn't know it existed. When I opened it, my heart sank. Someone had found it. The lock was broken. My folders were scattered across the floor, papers trampled and creased. The velvet box that once held my mother's pearl earrings lay open and empty. The gold watch my husband had worn every day of his life was gone. So were the silver coins I had collected over the years. I crouched down, searching through the mess, hoping to find some trace of order. That was when I saw it papers I didn't recognize, still stacked neatly in a manila folder. I pulled them out and started reading. The first page bore my name in bold letters. Petition for property transfer due to owner's mental incapacity. The words blurred for a moment as I tried to comprehend them. I read again. The undersigned, Michael Simmons, requests transfer of ownership of the coastal property currently under the care of Grace Simmons, age 70, who, according to medical assessment, no longer demonstrates cognitive stability necessary for property management. My throat went dry. I turned the pages with shaking hands. Attached was a medical report from a clinic I had never heard of, signed by a Dr. William Ross. The note claimed I suffered from mild to moderate senile dementia. I had never met that man in my life. Next to the doctor's signature was a receipt, $50 in cash. And then, in handwriting I recognized all too well. Karen's handwriting was a note written in blue ink, appraised at $310,000. Once the old woman signs, we can finally get out of debt. Michael just needs to stop hesitating. The old woman. That's what she had called me. The old woman who had built that house. The old woman who had paid for her wedding dress, her honeymoon, her children's Christmas presents. I sat there, the folder open on my knees, trying to steady my breath. The betrayal wasn't just shocking, it was calculated. It was premeditated. This wasn't some impulsive act of greed, it was a well-crafted plan, one that required lies, signatures, and legal manipulation. And my son, my only son, was part of it. I pressed the papers against my chest and closed my eyes. In that moment, I saw Michael as a little boy again, his hair sticking up after playing outside, his face smudged with dirt. I saw him holding my hand at his father's funeral, whispering, "Don't cry, Mom. I'll take care of you." I had believed him. I had built my life around that promise. And now, at 47, he had sold that promise for a lie written on stolen paper. Through the window, I could hear Karen's voice. She was outside laughing, the sound sharp and triumphant. "Don't worry, Mom," she was saying into her phone. "Once the lawyer finishes, everything will be official. Michael just has to sign." I stepped closer to the window. From the second floor, I could see the terrace, the same terrace where my husband and I once drank coffee, watching the sunrise. Karen and her family were sitting there, eating, drinking, enjoying the view. They were using my plates, my silverware, my barbecue grill. Her sister Veronica was taking selfies by the hammock I had hung myself, captioning them with words that made my stomach twist. "Our new beach house. Blessed to have this paradise. Our new house." The arrogance of it made my blood run cold. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of the mess, the stains, the damage, everything I could use later. I knew then that I was no longer just a mother or a widow. I was a witness collecting evidence. I moved quickly, taking photos of every room, every broken item, every trace of intrusion. I needed proof, because whatever came next wouldn't be a family argument. It would be war. As I turned to leave, I heard Karen again, her voice floating through the open window. "Yes, Mom. The doctor already filed the report. It's all set. Once Michael signs, we can sell the property. It's perfectly legal. They can't stop it once it's processed." Her tone was casual, confident. Then she added, laughing softly, "The old woman won't even know what happened. By the time she realizes, it'll all be ours." I stood frozen, gripping the doorknob so hard it hurt. The hallway around me blurred for a moment. That was when the last piece of illusion fell away. They weren't misguided. They weren't desperate. They were thieves organized, deliberate, unashamed. I walked down the stairs silently, clutching the folder. No one saw me leave. Outside, the sky had turned the color of lead. The wind had shifted, carrying the scent of salt and rain. I looked back once, just once, at the house that had been my refuge and now stood as a symbol of betrayal. I whispered to myself, "You think I'm too old to fight? You'll see how wrong you are." Then I walked to my car, my steps steady, my heart no longer broken but burning. They had written the first chapter of this war with deceit. I would write the last one with truth. The following morning, the clouds above the ocean were pale and restless, as if even the weather could sense the storm that was about to unfold. I had spent the night in that cramped motel room sorting through the stolen papers and photographs I had taken. They were spread across the bed in front of me, proof of deceit, proof that my only child had turned against me. Every line of handwriting, every signature, every forged word stared back at me like an accusation. By the time the first light broke through the curtains, I knew exactly what I had to do. At 9 o'clock, I parked across the street from the house and watched from my car. I could see Karen's relatives moving about the porch, laughing as if nothing in the world could touch them. I waited for Michael to arrive. He had to come eventually. They couldn't proceed with their plan without his final signature. When his gray sedan finally turned into the driveway, my heart clenched. He looked older than I, remembered hair thinner, face heavier, but his posture was still the same, confident, almost proud. He stepped out of the car and greeted Karen with a kiss on the cheek. I could barely watch it. I waited 20 minutes before crossing the street and walking up to the front door. My hand trembled as I pressed the bell. The door opened, and there he was, my son, my only son, standing in the doorway of the house I built. "Mom," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You came back." His voice was awkward, too light, as if he were trying to control the situation by pretending nothing had happened. "Yes," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "I came back." Karen appeared behind him almost instantly, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation. "What is she doing here?" she asked. "We already talked about this." I ignored her. "Michael, may I come in?" For a moment, he hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked into my living room, the place where I had celebrated birthdays, holidays, and countless quiet mornings with him, and now it felt foreign, occupied, poisoned by laughter that wasn't mine. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "I just have a few things to show you." I set the folder down on the dining table and slid the top page toward him. He frowned and picked it up. His hands, once so sure when he built his first model airplane at 12, trembled slightly now. "What is this?" he asked. "You tell me," I replied. "It has your name on it." He scanned the document, his eyes darting from line to line. I could see the moment he recognized it, the property transfer request, the forged medical note, the appraisal with Karen's handwriting. His face went pale. Karen reached over his shoulder, pretending to be confused. "What is this nonsense?" she demanded. "She's making things up again." I turned to her, my voice low but steady. "You paid a doctor $50 to declare me mentally unfit. You forged my signature, and you were about to sell this house behind my back." "That's ridiculous," she said, laughing nervously. "You must have found some old drafts or something. You don't even know what you're talking about." "Then explain this," I said, pointing to the note in her handwriting, the one that said, "Once the old woman signs, we can finally get out of debt." Her smile faltered. "You were spying on us," she hissed. "You went through our private things." "Private?" I said. "This is my home, my closet, my life. Nothing here belongs to you." Michael set the paper down and rubbed his forehead. "Mom, please, let's not do this right now." "Then when?" I asked. "After you've taken everything I worked for? After I'm declared incompetent so you can play the role of the generous son who takes care of his poor, confused mother?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes were full of guilt. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he finally whispered. I stepped closer. "Then how was it supposed to be, Michael? You thought I wouldn't find out? That I'd just disappear quietly while you and your wife turned my life into a paycheck?" Karen crossed her arms. "You're overreacting. We were just trying to make practical decisions. You're getting older, Grace. You can't manage everything forever. Michael and I thought it would be best if—" "If what?" I interrupted. "If you took what isn't yours? You thought I'd be too weak to fight back?" Her tone changed then, her voice sharp as glass. "You should be thanking us. At least we're putting this house to good use. Look around, it's full of life now, not like when you come alone to stare at the sea like some ghost." I took a slow breath. I could feel my pulse rising, but I didn't want to shout. I wanted her to hear every word clearly. "This house isn't a shelter for thieves," I said. "And it isn't a charity project for your debts. You have 24 hours to leave." Karen laughed a loud, cruel sound that filled the room. "You can't throw us out. You wouldn't dare call the police on your own son." I met her gaze without blinking. "You're right. I wouldn't call the police on my son, but I would on you." Michael stepped between us, his voice shaking. "Mom, stop. Please. This isn't helping." "Then help me understand," I said, turning to him. "Did you know about the fake medical report? Did you know she planned to sell the house?" He hesitated. I could see the war inside him, the part that still loved me, and the part that feared her. Finally, he looked down. "Yes," he said softly. "I knew." It felt like something inside me broke quietly, without sound. I stared at him, searching for the boy who once promised to protect me. He was gone. In his place stood a man who had traded love for convenience, decency for greed. Karen smirked, triumphant. "See? He told you. Now stop making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself." I straightened my back. "No, Karen," I said. "You've embarrassed yourself. You've shown exactly who you are." I turned to Michael, my voice trembling but firm. "You had a choice, son. You could have come to me. You could have asked for help. But instead, you chose deceit." "Mom, please, I just wanted to secure our future." "Your future," I corrected. "Not ours. You've already destroyed ours." For a moment, silence filled the house. Only the sound of the ocean outside broke it. Karen looked from him to me, suddenly less sure of herself. I picked up the folder from the table and slipped the documents back inside. "You think I'm too old to fight," I said quietly. "You think I'll give up because you're my son, but you've forgotten something important." "What's that?" she asked, crossing her arms again. "That I built this house brick by brick while you were both still figuring out who you were. I survived widowhood, poverty, and loneliness. You think I can't survive you?" Her face flushed with anger. "What are you going to do, hire a lawyer? Waste your savings on court fees?" I smiled then, not kindly but with certainty. "Who told you I was broke?" I walked to the door, my steps steady. Before I left, I turned to Michael one last time. "You've made your choice. So have I." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain. The sea roared louder, as if echoing my resolve. I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. But I whispered under my breath, "You started this war, Michael, you and your wife, and I'm going to end it with the truth." The rain arrived before dawn, a soft percussion against the motel window that matched the rhythm of my thoughts. I had not slept. The events of the previous day replayed endlessly in my mind, the sound of Karen's laughter, the blank look in Michael's eyes, the sting of realizing my own son had betrayed me. Each memory cut like glass, yet I felt something stronger than grief beginning to take shape inside me. It wasn't rage anymore, it was resolve. I sat on the edge of the bed with the manila folder open beside me, the papers spread out like battle maps. My husband used to say that the most dangerous person in a fight is the one who has nothing left to lose. That morning, I finally understood what he meant. I left the motel just as the sun began to rise, painting the wet streets with thin streaks of gold. My destination was clear the bank where I had kept every penny of my savings for over 15 years. The place felt unchanged, the scent of polished wood, the faint hum of printers, the low murmur of morning customers. Behind the counter stood Alan, the manager who had known me since I was a seamstress bringing in small deposits from my tailoring work. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Mrs. Simmons," he said warmly, "it's been a while. What brings you in so early?" I tried to return his smile, but the fatigue was too heavy. "I need to review my accounts," I said quietly. "And I need your help." Something in my voice must have alarmed him, because his expression shifted from friendliness to concern. He led me to his office, closed the door, and gestured for me to sit. "Tell me what's going on." I laid the folder on his desk and began to speak. The words came slowly at first, then faster, fueled by equal parts disbelief and fury. I told him everything from the day I arrived at the house to the discovery of the forged documents, the fake medical report, and the betrayal written in my daughter-in-law's own handwriting. Alan listened without interrupting, his brow furrowed deeper with every page he turned. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, "Grace, I've seen a lot of things in my career, but this is cruel beyond measure." He swiveled his chair toward his computer and began typing rapidly. "First, we'll secure your accounts. No one can touch them without your consent. I'll personally make sure of it." Within minutes, he printed out my most recent statement and handed it to me. My total balance was $119,000, a lifetime of small sacrifices stacked one atop another. That's enough to fight back, I said softly, tracing my finger over the numbers. Alan nodded. You'll also need legal representation, someone who specializes in elder financial abuse. There's a woman I trust completely, Linda Porter. She's helped several of my clients. Sharp, discreet, and relentless when it comes to justice. Should I call her? Yes, I said. Please. He dialed her number, and within an hour, I was sitting in her office downtown. Linda Porter was in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a clean bob and eyes that carried both intelligence and compassion. Her handshake was firm. Mr. Allen told me a bit, she said, motioning for me to sit. But I'd like to hear everything in your own words. I recounted the story again, this time slower, more measured. She took notes carefully, asking precise questions that showed she had already begun forming a plan. When I handed her the documents, she examined them like a surgeon inspecting an X-ray. These signatures, she said, were forged by someone who thought you'd never check. That doctor's report alone could destroy them in court. $50 in cash for a false diagnosis, it's practically an engraved confession. I asked the question that had haunted me all night. Can they really do this? Can they take everything I own with just a few papers? She leaned back in her chair. They can try, but they won't succeed, not if we move quickly. She opened a fresh file and began writing. We'll start with 4 actions. First, an immediate eviction order for trespassing. Second, a police report for theft and forgery. Third, a formal complaint to the medical board against that doctor. And fourth, a restraining order to keep them away from you and your property. Her pen scratched across the paper like a promise. But there's something else I want you to do, Grace. Don't just defend yourself, document everything. Take photographs, keep a log of dates, every conversation, every message. The more evidence you have, the more control we'll hold. For the first time in days, I felt the faint stirrings of power returning to me. You sound like you've done this before, I said. I have, she replied, and I've learned something. People like your daughter-in-law build their schemes on 2 assumptions: that their victims are too old to notice and too afraid to fight. Once you shatter those illusions, they crumble fast. Her words stayed with me long after I left her office. As I walked down the steps into the sunlight, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't peace exactly, it was the steadiness that comes when pain hardens into purpose. I stopped by a small cafe, ordered a sandwich, and spread the documents across the table one last time. For years I had lived quietly, avoiding confrontation, believing that kindness could fix everything. But that morning I understood that silence was a luxury I could no longer afford. On my way back to the motel, I stopped at an electronics store and bought a small recording device and a set of home cameras. If they wanted to treat me like I was weak, I would use their arrogance against them. I'd record every word, every visit, every threat. Truth, after all, was the only weapon they couldn't counterfeit. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I called Alan to confirm the account freeze and thanked him for his help. Grace, he said gently, you're doing the right thing. Don't let guilt stop you from protecting yourself. They chose greed over love. Let them live with that choice. After I hung up, I sat by the window watching the last light fade over the sea. The sky turned a deep orange, and the sound of waves reached me even through the glass. I thought of my husband again, how he used to say that storms always look worse from the shore but calmer once you face them head on. Maybe he was right. I wasn't hiding anymore. I had allies, evidence, and a plan. I took out a notebook and began to write. Dates, names, phone calls, everything I could remember. My handwriting was shaky at first, then steadier. It felt like reclaiming a part of myself that had been buried under years of quiet endurance. Before going to bed, I whispered into the empty room, "Tomorrow, I fight." The ocean outside answered with a crash against the rocks, as if it had heard me. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. By the time the sun rose over the water, I had already chosen my path. There was no going back, No pretending ignorance, no more hoping that time or kindness would undo what had been done. The betrayal was carved into paper and sealed with signatures, and now the law would carve it back into truth. I arrived at Linda Porter's office just as the city began to stir, shops opening, commuters rushing, the world moving on as if nothing had changed, but everything had changed for me. Linda looked up from her desk as I entered, her eyes sharp yet kind. "Grace," she said. "I've been expecting you," Alan called. "He said you're ready to proceed." I nodded. "I am." She gestured for me to sit. "Good, because once we start, there's no pause button. This will move fast, and it may get ugly." "Ugly doesn't scare me anymore," I replied. Linda smiled faintly. "Then let's begin." She opened a leather folder and spread out a series of legal drafts. Each was labeled with a number: eviction order, theft complaint, medical board petition, restraining order. Her handwriting was precise, firm, controlled. "These are the first 4 actions," she said. "Together they'll cut off every angle your son and his wife have been using against you." I leaned forward, absorbing every word. "The eviction is immediate?" "Yes. As soon as the judge signs it, we can have the police deliver notice within 48 hours. The fake doctor will be reported the same day." "The complaint includes the payment receipt, $50, correct?" I nodded. "Cash." "Perfect. That will go straight to the state's medical review board. The forgery charge will follow. And as for the restraining order, we'll include evidence of verbal harassment, financial manipulation, and unlawful occupation of your property." Her efficiency was breathtaking. For a moment, I simply watched her, mesmerized by how easily she moved through the machinery of justice that had once seemed impossible to reach. "You're good at this," I murmured. She looked up, her expression softening. "I'm good because women like you keep walking through that door. You'd be surprised how often this happens, Grace. It's not just greed, it's entitlement, an illness that runs deep in families." I thought of Karen's smirk, of Michael's silence, and felt the truth of her words like a knife. "I just want to protect what's mine," I said quietly. "And you will," she replied, "but we're not just going to protect it, we're going to make sure they answer for what they've done." We spent the next 2 hours reviewing every document I'd gathered. I had never been so meticulous in my life, every photograph labeled with the date and time, every page in order. Linda examined them all, sometimes nodding approvingly, sometimes frowning. "This," she said at one point, holding up a photo of the stolen property papers, "is a turning point. You have physical evidence of premeditation. This isn't just a family dispute, it's a crime." Something inside me shifted then. For weeks, I had felt like a victim, powerless against the cruelty of my own blood. But hearing those words, "it's a crime," was like breathing again. It wasn't just my burden to carry anymore. It was the truth laid bare for others to see. When everything was signed, Linda leaned back and folded her hands. "There's one last question, Grace. Do you want this to stay quiet, or do you want to go public?" I hesitated. The old part of me, the part that had been raised to avoid confrontation, whispered to stay silent. But another part, stronger, fiercer, spoke louder. "No," I said firmly. "Let it be public." They used shame as a weapon. "Let the world see who they really are." Linda smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." By noon, she had already filed the paperwork electronically and scheduled a meeting with the sheriff's office for the following morning. "Once they're served," she said, "you'll have legal possession of your home restored. Don't go there alone until then. They'll be angry, and angry people make mistakes. Let them." I thanked her and stood to leave, but she stopped me. "Grace," she said softly, "this isn't just about a house. This is about you reclaiming your power. Remember that." I walked out of her office into the afternoon sunlight, feeling strangely lighter, as though every step I took carried me closer to something I had forgotten myself. For the first time since the nightmare began, I wasn't reacting. I was acting. At a small diner near the courthouse, I sat by the window and ordered soup. My reflection in the glass startled me. The woman staring back wasn't broken or defeated. She looked older, yes, but sharper, her eyes brighter, her mouth set in quiet determination. I realized then that I had crossed a threshold. I wasn't just fighting for property, I was fighting for dignity for every older woman who'd been told she was too fragile, too naive, too gentle to stand up for herself. When I returned to the motel that evening, I found a voicemail from Alan. "The freeze is active," he said. "No withdrawals, no transfers, everything is safe. Also, I checked the doctor's license. There's already an investigation open on him for similar misconduct. Your case might just end his career." I closed my eyes and let the relief wash over me. The wheels of justice were turning, slow but unstoppable. I spent the rest of the evening writing in my notebook again, each page more confident than the last. The fear that had paralyzed me only days ago was now replaced by focus. Before bed, I called Linda one last time. "I've been thinking," I said. "Once this is over, I want to do something for others like me, maybe a fund for seniors facing this kind of abuse." There was a pause on the line. Then her voice came, warm and proud. "That's exactly the kind of victory they can't take from you." After I hung up, I stood at the window, watching the dark water move under the moonlight. Somewhere out there, my house stood waiting, violated, but still standing. Tomorrow, the papers would be served. Tomorrow, the lies would begin to unravel. I pressed my hand against the glass and whispered to the night, "You thought I was too old to fight. You were wrong. I'm not old, I'm timeless when I'm right." The wind answered in a low, steady sigh. I slept with that sound in my ears, certain now that I was no longer alone in this battle. The morning of the eviction dawned clear and cold, as if the sky itself wanted to witness justice unfold. I arrived at the courthouse just before 8, my heart pounding in quiet rhythm with my steps. Linda Porter met me in the marble hallway, wearing her usual calm smile and carrying a stack of documents so thick it could have been a shield. "The judge signed everything," she said, handing me the top page. The official seal gleamed under the fluorescent light. "You're going home today, Grace." Those words struck something deep inside me. Home. The word no longer meant comfort, it meant battle. Still, I nodded. "Then let's finish this." An hour later, we stood in front of my beach house. The waves crashed rhythmically behind us as a police car pulled into the driveway, its lights flashing in the morning Sunday. The officer stepped out, followed by a public notary. Linda introduced everyone with the measured confidence of a woman who had done this 100 times. But for me, it felt like standing on sacred ground, like reclaiming a stolen piece of my soul. Through the front window, I could see Karen and her family eating breakfast on my porch as if they owned it. Her laughter carried across the yard, shrill and careless. The moment she saw the police car, her face drained of color. The mug she was holding slipped from her hand, shattering on the wooden deck. Linda was the first to speak. "Mrs. Simmons," she called, her voice strong and professional. "I am attorney Linda Porter, legal representative of the property's rightful owner, Miss Grace Simmons. This is an official court order for immediate eviction due to unlawful trespassing." Karen appeared at the doorway, eyes wild. "What are you talking about? My husband is her son. We have every right to be here." The police officer unfolded the document. "Do you have any legal proof of ownership, ma'am?" "Michael told me," she began. "Do you have proof?" the officer repeated, his tone even. She stammered, her eyes darting from one face to another. "He's at work," she said finally. "Then this order stands," the officer replied. "You and your family have 2 hours to vacate the premises. All property belonging to Miss Simmons stays here. Any interference will be treated as obstruction." Karen's mother stepped out behind her, already trembling. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "We're family. You can't just throw us out." Linda looked at her coolly. Family doesn't falsify medical reports to steal a house. She held up the evidence, the signature still visible beneath the forged stamp. "You've all participated in criminal activity, and your daughter is the primary instigator." Karen's face turned crimson. "That's a lie. We were trying to help her. She's old and confused." "Old, perhaps," I interrupted, stepping forward, "but not confused." My voice was calm, but filled with the weight of everything they'd done. "You called me a burden, a parasite, an obstacle. You invaded my home and destroyed what I built with my own hands. And now you'll face the law." The notary stepped in, marking the time and reading the order aloud for the record. I watched Karen's expression twist between fury and fear. Her teenage nephew began recording the scene with his phone, but the officer quickly stopped him. "This is a legal procedure, not a spectacle," he said, confiscating the device. Inside, the house was chaos. My furniture was stained, the floors littered with clothes and trash. I had spent decades building this refuge, and in just a few weeks, they had reduced it to something unrecognizable. Still, I didn't cry. Not this time. Every broken cup, every dent in the wall, was proof of what they had done and evidence of what I had survived. Karen ran to her mother, her voice trembling. "They can't do this. It's my husband's house, too." Linda handed her another document. "Actually, it's not. The property is solely in Miss Simmons's name. Taxes, maintenance, and all bills paid by her alone. You've been living here illegally." As the officer began directing them to pack, I stood by the doorway, watching. The air inside was heavy with panic. Karen's mother muttered curses under her breath. Her sister cried quietly as she stuffed clothes into a suitcase. The children clung to each other, confused and frightened, and for a fleeting moment, I pitied them. None of this was their fault. They were just caught in the storm their parents had created. After an hour, a car pulled up. The sound of tires crunching against the gravel made everyone freeze. Michael stepped out, his face pale and drawn. For a moment, I almost saw the boy he used to be, the one who brought me seashells from the shore and promised he'd never let me grow old alone. But then I remembered the forged signature and the silence that followed my humiliation. That boy was gone. "Mom," he said, breathless, "what's happening here?" Linda turned to him. "Mr. Simmons, you're being cited as an accomplice in attempted asset fraud and elder abuse. You'll receive a court summons within 72 hours. He looked at me, his voice breaking. "Mom, please, we can talk about this. You don't have to do this." I met his eyes and said quietly, "You already did it, Michael. I'm just finishing what you started." Karen grabbed his arm. "Tell them she's crazy," she whispered. "Tell them she's not in her right mind." Michael froze, torn between fear and guilt. "I can't," he said finally. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The officer spoke again, breaking the moment. "Time's up, you need to leave now." Karen's face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," she spat. "You'll die alone in this house." I looked at her evenly. Better alone in truth than surrounded by liars. They packed the last of their belongings in bitter silence. I stood by the window as their cars disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but dust in the sunlight. The police officer handed me the keys. "Miss Simmons," he said softly, "your house has been officially restored to you." When everyone left, I walked through the empty rooms. Every sound echoed the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the ocean beyond the glass. The house was scarred, but it was mine again. I ran my hand along the dining table, feeling the scratches and stains, and whispered, "You're safe now." That night, I sat on the porch, watching the sea. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the dark sky. I thought of Michael and felt both sorrow and relief. He had made his choice, and I had made mine. Justice had spoken, but peace would take longer. Still, as the tide rolled in, I knew one thing for certain. They had underestimated me. They thought age meant weakness. They thought silence meant surrender. But I was still here, standing tall against the wind, proof that a woman's strength doesn't fade with time. It deepens, like the ocean itself. The week following the eviction was strangely quiet. For the first time in months, the house stood still, no shouting, no music, no heavy footsteps on the stairs. Only the sea remained constant, its steady rhythm carrying through the walls as if it too needed to breathe after the storm. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, feeling the grooves of old paint beneath my fingertips. Everything had been violated, yet somehow it was still mine. I had won the legal battle, but the emotional wreckage was harder to sweep away. Linda called that Friday afternoon. "Grace," she said, "the prosecutor is moving forward. They've decided to press criminal charges for asset fraud and conspiracy. The doctor's license has been suspended. They found a dozen other fake evaluations with the same signature. Your case was the final nail." For a moment, I said nothing. Justice had arrived faster than I expected, and yet it felt heavier than I'd imagined. "What does that mean for them?" I asked quietly. "It means they'll face real consequences, probably fines, community service, probation, no prison, but a permanent record, and that record will follow them everywhere." When I hung up, I sat in my chair by the window and let the news settle. It wasn't joy I felt. Not really. It was closure, like the final note of a song that had gone on too long. I had spent my life believing that decency and patience could solve anything. Now I knew that justice sometimes required noise. 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A shaky voice came through the line. "Grace, it's Melissa, Karen's sister." I stiffened. "What do you want?" Karen is desperate. Michael, too. They've already spent over $15,000 on lawyers, and the fines are drowning them. She asked me to call you. She says she's sorry. She wants to make things right. "Does she want forgiveness?" I asked, "or does she want me to drop the lawsuits?" There was a pause. "Both, I think. She said they'll return everything they took, the jewelry, the documents, all of it." I closed my eyes. The thought of seeing them again made my stomach twist, but part of me wanted to look them in the face to see what regret actually looked like. "Tell her," I said finally. "If she truly means it, she can come here herself, and she should bring every last thing she stole." Melissa murmured her thanks and hung up. I didn't expect her to follow through, but 2 days later the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, Karen stood there. Her hair was pulled back hastily, her eyes red and swollen. In her hands was a small velvet bag. "May I come in?" she asked. I nodded and led her to the living room. She sat on the edge of the chair like a child waiting to be scolded. One by one, she placed the items on the table, the pearl earrings my mother had given me, the gold watch my husband once wore, the silver coins that had sat in my desk drawer for decades. "I came to return everything," she whispered, "and to apologize." I said nothing. The silence between us was heavier than any words could be. Finally, she broke it. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. I just wanted to use the house while you weren't here." But then the debts kept piling up. Michael lost money in some bad deals, and I panicked. I thought if we transferred the property, we could fix everything. "You thought stealing from me would fix everything?" She flinched. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was desperate. "Desperation doesn't excuse deceit," I said quietly. "You didn't just take objects, Karen. You took memories. You took trust. Do you understand that?" Tears streamed down her face. "I do, and I hate myself for it." I leaned back, studying her. She looked so small now, stripped of arrogance and confidence. "Where's Michael?" "He wouldn't come," she said after a long pause. "He says you're not his mother anymore. He says you chose money over family." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "That's what people say when they've already chosen greed over love." She looked down, her voice breaking. "He's ashamed, Grace. He won't admit it, but he is." "Shame isn't repentance," I replied. "It's just the fear of being seen." She met my eyes then, a faint flicker of the defiant woman she once was. "What will it take for you to end the lawsuits?" "Nothing you can buy," I said. "If you want me to forgive you, it won't come through courts or settlements. It will come through truth and through Michael looking me in the eyes and admitting what he did. Until then, there's nothing to discuss." She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that answer. "He won't come," she said again. "Then neither will forgiveness." When she left, the silence in the house felt different, not painful anymore, just final. The tide had gone out, leaving only what was meant to remain. A week later, Linda called again. "It's over," she said. "They've accepted a plea deal, $25,000 in fines each, 200 hours of community service, 2 years of probation. Their names will stay in the record forever, and the doctor's license has been revoked." I thanked her softly. "How much have they lost?" "Over $50,000, between the legal fees and fines. Sometimes justice costs exactly what greed is worth." That night I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the porch. The air was cool, the sky a canvas of quiet stars. I thought of Michael, not the man who betrayed me, but the boy he once was, sitting beside me on this same porch, dreaming of the future. I wished him peace, even if it was far away from me. In the weeks that followed, I began rebuilding. I hired a small cleaning crew to restore what they'd ruined, replaced the locks, and installed security cameras. But I also made one more change. I rewrote my will. The house would go not to my son, but to an organization that defended seniors from financial abuse. If Michael wanted independence, he would have it completely. Months later, a letter arrived in the mail. His handwriting was unmistakable, though shakier than I remembered. "Mom," it began, "we've learned our lesson. The kids miss you. Maybe someday we can be a family again." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't answer. Some stories don't need endings, they just need peace. I had found mine, not in revenge, but in resilience. I was still standing in the home I built with my own hands, the sea still whispering outside my window. Age hadn't weakened me, it had refined me. And though the world had tried to silence me, I had proven something greater, that the quiet strength of an older woman, once awakened, can shake the very ground beneath those who underestimate her. 6 months had passed since the trial ended, and the air around the beach house had changed. It no longer carried the weight of betrayal, it carried the quiet rhythm of survival. The mornings smelled of salt and jasmine again, and the sound of the waves had replaced the chaos that once filled these walls. I had spent those months rebuilding, not just the house, but myself. The cleaning crews had come and gone. Every window shone, every surface gleamed, and the faint scent of lemon polish lingered in the air. I had replaced the curtains with ones I sewed myself, light and cream-colored, the kind that let the morning sun in gently. The cracks in the walls were patched, but I didn't paint over them. I wanted the scars to remain a reminder of the storm I had weathered and survived. One quiet afternoon, I sat on the porch overlooking the sea, a cup of tea in hand, and watched a pair of gulls circle above the waves. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace, not the fragile peace that trembles after battle, but the steady, earned peace that comes when you know you have done what needed to be done. My thoughts wandered to Michael. I wondered whether he ever thought of me, whether guilt ever kept him awake at night the way his betrayal had once kept me, but I didn't dwell on it. I had stopped hoping for apologies that would never come. Instead, I turned my focus to something bigger than myself. A few weeks after the sentencing, I had called Linda with an idea. "I don't just want to move on," I had told her. "I want to make sure other women like me never have to go through this. Together." We began laying the groundwork for what would become the Grace Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting seniors from financial and familial exploitation. Linda handled the legal structuring, and I provided the seed funding from my savings. Word spread quickly. Soon, local volunteers began reaching out: social workers, retired lawyers, even a few younger people who wanted to learn how to advocate for their grandparents. Within months, we had an office in town, modest but filled with warmth. Every time I stepped through those doors, I felt that same fire that had carried me through court, the knowledge that my pain had turned into purpose. One morning, as I was sorting donation letters, a young woman entered the office. She couldn't have been older than 25. Her hands trembled as she handed me an envelope. "My grandmother was almost tricked into signing over her house," she said. "Your story gave us the courage to go to the police. I wanted to thank you." I took the letter from her and smiled. Her words washed over me like sunlight. That was the moment I knew everything I had endured had meaning. Back at home that evening, I sat on my terrace, watching the horizon fade into gold. I thought of all the women I had met through the foundation, each with their own battle scars, each with their own story of betrayal and resilience. We had become a quiet army, fighting not with anger but with truth. That same week, a letter arrived. It was from Michael again. The handwriting was steadier this time, more deliberate. "Mom," it began, "I understand if you never want to see me again. But I need you to know I'm trying to change. I lost more than money. I lost the person who taught me what integrity means. If you ever want to talk, I'll be waiting." I sat with that letter for a long while. The old ache stirred again, but it was softer now. I didn't write back. Forgiveness, I had learned, isn't a letter. it's a boundary. Sometimes it means letting go without reopening the door. That night, as I walked through the house, I noticed the reflection of the moon on the dining table, the same table that had once witnessed arguments and tears. It now shimmered quietly, untroubled. I ran my fingers over its smooth surface and whispered, "We made it." Later that month, the foundation organized its first public event, a fundraiser to support legal aid for elderly victims of fraud. I wore a deep blue dress, the same color as the sea on stormy days. When I stood before the audience to speak, my voice carried the calm authority of someone who had faced fire and survived it. "I built my house with my own hands," I told them, "and then I watched it be taken from me first by arrogance, then by greed. But what I learned is this: you can lose property, money, even family, but if you hold on to your dignity, you lose nothing of worth. Never let anyone make you feel disposable. Your age is not your weakness, it is your proof of endurance." The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was steady, heartfelt, and filled the room like a heartbeat. After the event, a journalist approached me. "Miss Simmons," she said, "you've become a symbol of strength for so many people. What do you want others to take from your story?" I smiled gently. "That silence isn't grace. Standing up for yourself is. There's no age limit on dignity." As the months turned to a year, life returned to its rhythm. I tended to my garden, sewed dresses for the local church choir, and visited the foundation twice a week. Sometimes, when I walked along the beach, I imagined my husband walking beside me, proud of what I'd become. I liked to think he would have smiled at how I had turned the pain of betrayal into something beautiful. On the first anniversary of reclaiming my home, I invited a few close friends from town for dinner. We ate under the soft glow of lanterns, laughter mingling with the sound of the waves. For dessert, I served lemon pie, his favorite recipe. As the night drew to a close, I raised my glass and said quietly, "To every woman who was ever told she was too old to fight back, may she rise anyway." The clinking of glasses echoed into the night, and I felt the peace I had chased for so long finally settle inside me. When the guests left, I lingered on the porch alone, listening to the waves and the wind moving through the trees. The ocean glimmered under the moonlight, endless and forgiving. My house, my life stood whole again. And as the night deepened, I whispered to myself one final truth. They took my trust, but they couldn't take my spirit. They tried to silence me, but I became a voice for others. And that is how you win, not through revenge, but through becoming unbreakable. In the end, Grace Simmons' story is not merely about reclaiming a stolen house. It's about reclaiming the meaning of self-worth, dignity, and the right to be respected no matter one's age. What began as a story of humiliation and betrayal became a journey of awakening. When her own family conspired to strip her of everything she had built, Grace stood tall against the tide. She did not let her years or her fear silence her. Instead, she chose knowledge, strategy, and courage over victimhood. Her house, once invaded and defiled, became a symbol of restoration, proof that justice, though slow, has power when paired with persistence. But beyond the legal victories and the punishment of those who wronged her, Grace's true triumph was internal. She rebuilt not just her home, but her sense of self. She learned that forgiveness does not mean allowing others to cross your boundaries, and that love without respect is nothing but manipulation in disguise. Through her foundation, she turned her pain into purpose, transforming her private wounds into public service. She became a voice for thousands of seniors who have faced similar battles in silence, proving that standing up for yourself is not selfish, it's essential. Her story reminds us that age does not weaken us, it distills us. It burns away illusion until only truth remains. We live in a world that often dismisses the elderly, labeling them as burdens rather than as living archives of resilience. Grace's story tells us the opposite, that life experience is armor, not frailty. She reminds us that it's never too late to draw a line, never too late to reclaim control, never too late to start again. Whether you're 60, 70, or 80, the strength you need has been growing quietly inside you all along. When life tests your boundaries, respond with wisdom and courage. Do not wait for others to grant you permission to defend what is yours, your peace, your independence, your dignity. And if you ever find yourself broken by betrayal, remember Grace Simmons. Remember that sometimes, the act of standing up for yourself is not just a defense, it's a declaration of who you are and what you will never allow again. Now let me ask you something simple yet meaningful. If you were in Grace's place, would you choose to forgive your son, or would you keep your distance to protect your peace? Comment your answer below. I'd love to hear your perspective and see what others think too. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and stay with us. Your support helps us keep sharing more stories of strength, courage, and second chances.